You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. We have such a great show for you today. We have all of your favorites, Surrealism Corner and Fighting Words, and we have a brand new little mini feature that you'll find at the end of the program in Fighting Words. It's called Reclaimed Anniversaries. I can't wait for it and to see what you think of it. And my special guest today for the conversation is probably the most powerful woman in television, and certainly the woman whose talent in producing and developing programs for television has created the shows you most love, no matter what channel they've been on. So let's get to all of that, and first, we need to go inside the headlines. We are one worldwide movement, and we stand on each other's shoulders. Last week, the streaming giant Netflix and the chief executive of Disney indicated that they would rethink using the state of Georgia as a film location because of its position so drastically restricting women's reproductive rights. Soon, other major media companies issued similar statements. Viacom, CBS, NBC Universal, and Warner Media, the parent company of HBO. Now, abortion rights campaigners in Northern Ireland, which is a burgeoning film production hub, hope to draw the same response in their region, which has even more restrictive anti-abortion laws than the one in Georgia, if you can imagine it. The Republic of Ireland legalized abortion following the referendum last year, and that referendum laid down a challenge to Northern Ireland, as did a United Nations report that named Northern Ireland's policy of flat-out violation of human rights for women. While abortion has long been legal in England, Scotland, and Wales, the British government has ceded responsibility for the issue in Northern Ireland to the devolved administration in Belfast, where legalized abortion has been resisted by the largest party, the Protestant and conservative Democratic Unionist Party. Women in Northern Ireland can have abortions only in cases where doctors judge that their life or long-term health are threatened. So for years, they sought abortions by traveling across the Irish Sea to Brittany, or more recently across the border to the Republic of Ireland. Freedom, however, is contagious, and the film business is a potent economic tool. We thought that sex bias in animal studies was a problem solved. But no. Males are still considered the norm, and still constitute the vast majority of the test population, and the female body is still basically considered not at all, or less, either because it's regarded as a small male, or else too complicated and messy and complicated and changeable and stuff to study. Honest to God. Surely, we thought, years ago, with the famous heart attack study scandal, this had been addressed. It was thought, women didn't suffer from heart attacks because we present differently, our symptoms more commonly being nausea and dizziness and indigestion, rather than pain radiating through the left arm. Well, thanks to women's health movement pressure, women became included in test populations. So today, we know that heart attacks are the leading cause of death for women as well as men. When the National Institutes for Health in 2016 mandated that all preclinical research that they fund must include female subjects, we again thought, this is solved. But in an essay recently published in Science, Dr. Rebecca Shansky, a neuroscientist at Northeastern University, warns that simply adding female organisms to experiments misses the point. She warns that this is a public health problem with implications beyond neuroscience, and says scientists have to design experiments better suited to both biological sexes. Women make up about half the population, but female animals make up a far smaller percentage of biomedical research subjects. In neuroscience studies, males outnumber females 6-1. In the Victorian era, ideals of women's inferiority transmuted to pseudo-scientific notions that women were hysterical and under the influence of hormone-driven counterpoints to rational men. So scientists believed they could more easily identify how the brain worked without the messiness of fluctuating female hormones, thus making the male the standard. When evidence emerged that male rodents living in groups were as or more messy because their testosterone fluctuates, that did not get them eliminated from studies. Still, merely using more female subjects without understanding stereotyping isn't the answer. Anne Fink, a feminist neuroscientist and gender scholar at Lehigh University, emphasizes that sex is biological and gender as a social construct, arguing that drawing conclusions about gender from animal subjects that lack this social construct reaffirms damaging stereotypes. In 2013, for instance, the FDA issued an advisory recommending that women take half the dose of the sleeping pill Ambien than men, because women were reporting more severe side effects. But body weight, not sex, was the cause of incorrect dosing. Telling doctors the problem was the sex difference resulted in overweight women being underdosed and underweight men being overdosed. Dr. Shansky recommends that research be improved by studying the sexes in parallel or in the same cohort, instead of experimenting on one sex after the other and making the first set of results standard. For years, students have filed sexual assault complaints under pseudonyms, which permits them to seek justice while avoiding shame and being targeted on or offline. Universities generally have accepted the practice, but not in two recent lawsuits against Florida A&M University and in a 9-woman plaintiff suit against Dartmouth. Florida A&M is a renowned historically black college in Tallahassee, and Dartmouth has a difficult history of sexual harassment and assault regarding both faculty and student women. The efforts to unmask survivors of sexual offenses come as the Federal Education Department is in the final stages of reviewing some 220,000 comments about Education Secretary Betsy DeVos's proposed new rules under Title IX, rules concerned that those accused of sexual assaults were not given due process. National campus advocacy organizations have come forward with data proving the lifelong psychological harm inflicted by outing victims and survivors on top of them having to survive the sexual attacks themselves. A nationwide Canadian inquiry into the widespread murders and disappearances of Indigenous women and girls has equated the violence with genocide and holds Canada itself responsible. The nearly 3-year inquiry, during which more than 1,500 families of victims and survivors testified in emotional hearings across the country, generated a report which says the violence against women and girls amounts to, quote, a race-based genocide of Indigenous peoples, including First Nations, Inuit, and Métis Nation. This genocide has been powered by colonial structures. The report cites, among other events, Canada's one-time practice of Indigenous children being put in residential schools, where they were abused over decades, a practice also observed in the United States. Indigenous women and girls constitute about 4% of Canada's females, but 16% of the females killed, according to government statistics. The report itself was generated by Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission in 2015, imitating that of South Africa's. Despite attempts, the United States has never held such a commission. 16 women trained to become FBI agents and analysts have come forward in a lawsuit filed in May accusing the Bureau of gender discrimination in how it trains and evaluates female candidates. The women, 7 of whom still work at the FBI, specified incidents where they say they were punished for behavior their male colleagues got away with, and then when they complained, they experienced retaliation. They described a male-biased review process and overt sexual harassment. 10 of the former trainees agreed to be interviewed exclusively by NBC News. 5 of them asked not to be identified by their full names. They said that their experience at Quantico, Virginia's FBI Training Academy left them feeling, quote, angry, worthless, and disposable, close quote. One woman, Lauren Rose, provided an email received from then FBI Director James Comey in response to her expressed frustrations after serving with the FBI for nearly 6 years. Comey responded, telling her he would not question the actions of, quote, thoughtful leaders, close quote. Paula Bird, who still works with the FBI, says the Bureau should look at itself. Quote, we're an agency that investigates, so investigate this, close quote. Last, a lawsuit that really ignites hope. Juliana versus the United States, filed by kids. This case was scheduled to begin last October, but judges from the Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit granted the Trump regime an unusual pretrial appeal. A brief filed by the plaintiffs demands that the government step up to protect today's children and future generations from the worst effects of climate change. It says the plaintiffs are deprived of their, quote, rights to life, liberty, property, and public trust resources by federal government acts that knowingly destroy, endanger, and impair the unalienable climate system that nature endows. Close quote. The federal government wants the case dismissed before it can even go to trial. Meanwhile, the plaintiffs have asked the government to put the brakes on new fossil fuel extraction projects while the case is pending. The young people's lawsuit was originally filed in 2015, and the Obama administration had also tried to stop the case. But the administration did also sign the Paris Climate Agreement and took action to curb greenhouse gas emissions, while the Trump regime has, of course, left the Paris Agreement and refers to methane as, quote, freedom gas. The 21 young people first sued the United States government through a group called Our Children's Trust. We've been doing this for years, says one of the plaintiffs. For some of us, that's a quarter of our lives. 5 of them are old enough now to buy beer, and 14 of them can now vote. We have to take a short break now, but we have lots more to get to. Coming up still is The Conversation with a woman who has become a powerhouse in television and who cares even more for quality than for success, and yet who manages to produce both. And coming up is Fighting Words. And coming right up after the break is the Surrealism Corner. So stick around. Subscribe to this program on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. Follow us on Twitter at WMC Live, like our Facebook page at facebook.com/WMC Live, and visit us at WMCLive.com for more information about our show and our guests.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome back, and welcome into the Surrealism Corner. Well, The Supreme Court has a pretty pickle on its hands. Actually, what makes a pickle pretty? Anyway, in an April hearing on the case, it looked like the right-wing majority of the justices was sympathetic to Trumpist efforts to include a citizenship question on the 2020 census. This despite efforts by voter advocates protesting that this was a partisan power grab. It was Wilbur Ross, the Commerce Secretary, who added the citizenship question in a move that definitely will lead to serious undercounts of Latinx communities and immigrant communities. But happily, new evidence has been brought to light that should give the justices pause, and maybe tails as well. The decision will have far-reaching effects on everything from political representation to federal funding for many decades. In brief, a longtime Republican expert on redistricting who died last year, Thomas Hofeller, he was a major driver pushing the addition of the citizenship question to the census. Well, it turns out that according to a 2015 study written by Mr. Hofeller, adding a citizenship question would create, quote, a structural electoral advantage, close quote, that would benefit Republicans and non-Hispanic whites. Publicly denied, privately, openly admitted. The documents were unearthed last year by Mr. Hofeller's estranged daughter, who found them among his effects. Obviously, he wasn't such a great dad either. Let's hear it for estranged daughters who care about their country. You go, girl. Mike Pence, remember him? He thinks he's Vice President of the United States. He's very quiet. You hardly ever see or hear about him. Not that I'm complaining about that. However, he has been visible lately, since the Friends of the Fetus are on the march. He was so happy that the court upheld the Indiana law he had instituted when he was governor, requiring that fetal tissue be given a funeral. Oh, my God. He is suddenly everywhere now, ranting about the unborn. That got me to thinking that really the concept of the unborn ought to be as spooky as the concept of the undead. Just what does that construct mean? Why do we say, I was unwell yesterday, but not, I hope to be unsick tomorrow? Or, unblack people have not always been so nice to unwhite people? Or, unold people eventually do become unyoung in time? Yet we do say, just because you're unintelligent doesn't mean you're unschooled, and so forth. You see what I mean? And what does der stand mean without un in front of it anyway? In short, the unborn are also the unalive and the undead. More about this at some untime. In a lateral leap from the Vice President's office to the State Department, we lurch from one religionist to another. Yes, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, often referred to as one of the relatively sane ones, but then he's being compared to Let's Go Nuclear John Bolton. Mike Pompeo, if you remember, attends a weekly prayer group held by Ralph Drollinger, founder and president of Capital Ministries and a highly influential evangelical. Drollinger believes social welfare programs have no basis in Scripture, Christians in government have an obligation to hire only Christians, women should not be allowed to teach grown men, and the institution of the state is and must be an avenger of wrath because its, quote, God-given responsibility is to moralize a fallen world through the use of force, close quote. His elite Bible study group, weekly, includes Betsy DeVos, Secretary of Education, and Pompeo, and Mike Pence. Well, now Pompeo and his State Department are planning to launch a new panel to offer so-called fresh thinking on international human rights and, quote, natural law, which activists fear is aimed at narrowing protections for women and the lesbian and gay community. To be called the Commission on Unalienable Rights It will advise the Secretary of State, this according to a notice the State Department very quietly published in the Federal Register. It will provide the Secretary with, quote, fresh thinking about human rights discourse, where such discourse has departed from our nation's founding principles of natural law and natural rights, close quote. Damn right it's departed from our nation's founding principles, which were atheistic. Anyway, the word natural in such context often is used to mean God-given. The Trump regime has de-emphasized human rights in general in foreign policy and raises it very selectively. For instance, it highlights the repressive situation faced by women seeking more freedom in Iran, but it totally ignores identical, if not worse, challenges facing women activists in Saudi Arabia. In Iran, women can at least drive and vote. Pompeo's State Department has cut down or entirely eliminated sections about reproductive rights in its annual human rights report, and it has made attempts to eliminate references to sexual and reproductive health in United Nations documents. The new so-called Natural Law Human Rights Commission will meet at least once a month. It isn't clear who will serve on the panel or when their appointments will take effect, but its composition will greatly affect the policies it promotes. And our word this week from a foreign language that is not easily translatable into English serves double duty in two languages. The word is shul, S-H-U-L. It means sanctuary in Yiddish, and it can also mean safe place, safe house, temple, or synagogue. But in Tibetan, it means the impression left from what has passed. For instance, a footprint, a fossil, the after-image glow bright light leaves on your eye after you turn away, a canyon carved through rock by a river over millennia, matted grass where a dog slept, the acute absence of the presence of a beloved. Somehow, to derive knowledge of what was there before but is no longer there, and to derive it from a mere impression, and to know that as a safe place, qualifies for the realistic surreal. It's time for another short break. But what if you learned that all of the television programs you most loved, although they were splayed across a variety of channels, really had been put there by a single woman? You'd been watching really her network. And she's here to talk with us next, coming right up after the break on The Conversation. The Women's Media Center, founded in 2005 by Jane Fonda, Gloria Steinem, and myself, is a progressive, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to make women visible and powerful in media. You can learn more about the WMC at womensmediacenter.com.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome back, and welcome to The Conversation. These days, when you think of a woman in power in television, the first name that springs to mind is probably Sarah Barnett. When you think of auteur-driven, award-winning, distinctive dramatic series on television, the name that springs to mind is probably Sarah Barnett. When you think of someone cutting a swath through the most intelligent networks, AMC, BBC America, IFC, Sundance TV, you think, most probably, of the name Sarah Barnett. And when you think of who is our guest for the conversation today, you'd be right in thinking Sarah Barnett. Sarah Barnett, welcome to the program.
Pleasure to be here.
Well, congratulations. You are now president of AMC Entertainment Networks, BBC America, AMC, IFC, and Sundance TV. Do you ever sleep?
I actually sleep very well. Ever since I was very young, it's a thing that I have an art for. I love sleep. I think it's a luxury. I think it's way underrated. I don't have a moment to spare in my waking hours, but I do. I am an 8 hours a night girl.
Your role includes direct oversight of AMC Premiere, which is the company's SVOD service that offers fans the ability to watch original series without commercials and a variety of other benefits. I love it. I love it. And I want to start by talking to you about women of power, of which you now thankfully are one. We're getting there. We're inching in. You were inducted into the 2014 class of multi-channel news Wonder Women, and you've been named to the Cablefax Top 100 most powerful women list for the past 6 years. Now, powerful women used to be few and far between and used to happily kick any other woman climbing the ladder after them. There's a change now with mentoring and developing other women, and I want to also congratulate you because I know that when you became president of AMC, you fought for being replaced at BBC America with another woman, with Courtney Tomasma. That's unusual because usually it returns to, we gave one woman a chance and now we'll go back to the boys. You pulled that off, my dear. Thank you.
Well, I have to say, I didn't have to fight very hard because Courtney is a complete rock star. And it was apparent to everybody that she could very ably step into my shoes at BBC America. But yeah, I do think there's been a bit of a shift that's gone on. It used to be that there were sort of just one or two women in the room. And I think there is a sort of critical mass that makes a difference. I think if you are just the only woman in the room, or there's just you and one other, it can be really tricky because you're looked at as your opinions, your behavior, your tone, the way you try to argue and persuade, everything is sort of seen very much through the lens of gender. You're sort of carrying your gender in everything you do. And I think once there's not just one or two, but 3 or 5 or 7 women in the room, right, then, that sort of terrible weight starts to disappear, and you're a human with good thoughts or dumb thoughts, and good arguments or silly ones, and persuasiveness or not. Right. And I think that's when you start to really create an environment where you can actually contribute as a full human being. Yes. And you stop being a sort of curiosity or something.
Yes.
If there's only 1 or 2 women in the room, I think that men can be overly anxious about revealing themselves, upsetting you, about creating a sort of climate in which it's sort of female friendly, and in a way that bizarrely can make them more comfortable when you're not in the room because they're not having to try so hard.
Right.
So yeah, I think there's some jeopardy with there being just 1 or 2 women, and I think that's why, in some ways, it's sort of been depressingly slow for some of the numbers to grow at the rate that frankly they should. But I do think maybe a sea shift is happening, and I do think that some of the things that have played out in the past year or two around the big drama of, first of all, Harvey Weinstein,
yes,
being lassoed and brought down, and then in my mind it's a statue of Stalin, and then I don't know why, and then various other. I think that the for whatever reason, the ways in which consciousness is being raised in corporate boardrooms around the country, and frankly, the optics aren't good either if you don't have women at various levels. And I think that's fantastic, and I think it is creating a shift, and I think that everyone will benefit.
Well, it's vitally important because, of course, the Women's Media Center exists because media both reflects and defines what our realities are.
Yeah.
And so it's disproportionate that when consciousness of sexism finally, I wouldn't say hit Hollywood, but erupted from within, and people were not afraid to identify as feminists and were not afraid to call out the truth, that has an enormous ripple effect down through the entire culture. And also in the pipeline. I mean, when you speak of developing women's leadership, that means we have to get more women into the pipeline to begin with, which used to be a rarity. How are we coming with that?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting thinking about that from the seat I sit in, which is one of being a gatekeeper around what stories get told. And I think, there's a saying from somewhere, which I think is so true, which is if you can't see it, you can't be it.
Yes.
So I think that the ability to shape through the stories we tell, just as Women's Media Center is engaged in, to be able to reflect, but also really change the world through changing people's belief, understanding, and aspiration about who they can be in the world is enormous. And I've never taken that privilege lightly. And I think that a lot of my team equally are very activated and energized around this responsibility of telling stories that truly reflect a diverse point of view around people of color as well as around women, as well as for women. And we did actually a small anecdote is so Doctor Who, when we were at BBC America, Doctor Who is a 55-year-long running franchise. It's sort of gone on forever with a few sort of hiatuses, but the Doctors have all been men, which considering they have two hearts and regenerate, there's no reason why they equally can't shift gender. But it always had been men, wonderful men playing the role of the Doctor until the end of 2017. Last year, 2018.
Right. Huge
when
change.
Huge change. I mean, it was a huge pop culture moment, and some of the social media responses to little girls squealing with delight at the fact that the new Doctor's a girl, as one of them said, was just so heartwarming, but also profoundly impactful. And we partnered with Women's Media Center to do a study on the ways in which the representation of female superheroes can impact not just little girls but little boys, and impact the understanding and the expectations of what those young humans think women can be. In the role of superhero, I mean, representation of women generally in all sorts of complicated, messy, screwed up, as well as wonderful incarnations is something that we're very interested in doing across all of our networks here. But I think that specifically the representation of women as superheroes, there's something obviously so archetypal, so powerful about a superhero.
Absolutely.
And so it's important, and the fact that Jodie Whittaker will be out there hopefully for years to come, changing how little boys and little girls see women and the roles that women can play in the world is something that is big.
That's one example of something that's happened on your watch, but there are many examples. You seem to have a talent for aesthetic, artistic development, as well as the bottom line. And some CEOs in media, many of the boys, and even some of the first women who were trying to convince the boys they were just like the boys instead of being themselves, followed along the pattern of, no, the bottom line is everything. I mean, so that you're dealing, it seems to me, under your watch with not only Doctor Who, I was going to raise that, in fact, becoming a woman, but also nuances between women, like Killing Eve was an amazing series. That aesthetic side, the artistic side of development, as well as the bottom line, and in fact, seeing them as interlinked, how do you think you come by that, and how can we make more people catch it?
Well, I think I was lucky enough to be trained at the BBC, which has always been an entity that prioritizes complicated quality storytelling.
It's true.
And actually wasn't underpinned by commercial imperative. Its brief was to be relevant to everyone in the country, and to explore creatively, to be bold creatively. So that sort of trained me, and then I've been lucky enough since then to work for some fantastic brands like Sundance TV, which I ran before I ran BBC America, and then now AMC and IFC. And I think that this company, AMC Networks, really does understand. AMC was put on the map because of Mad Men and Breaking Bad, and shows that had a really distinct and very, not obviously sort of, they didn't land as obviously the most commercial choice to make. But I think so much of it is about seeing if there's any skill in being a programmer. It's, you get it wrong more than you get it right, but seeing a little bit around the corner about what's to come. And I think that then if you can find those fresh voices just before it's part of the mainstream, then those are the times, I think, where the risky creative choice can also end up being the successful business choice. And I think that a show called something like Top of the Lake with Jane Campion, which when I was at Sundance, we did. It actually didn't drive enormous viewers, but it really, along with a few other things, put that brand on the map because it was so fresh, and it was a moment where film auteurs were moving into television, and someone like Jane Campion, it was rare for someone like Jane Campion to be making TV, and she'd long been an idol of mine. So to get to work with her on that in some way was incredible personally, but also really good for the brand and the business. And then Killing Eve,
remarkable.
I mean, Phoebe Waller-Bridge is just the most genius voice in television right now. She really is. With half hours or hours, she can turn her hand to anything. And I think what's so great about Killing Eve is it takes a fairly familiar architecture, if you like, of storytelling. It's a thriller, and there's a cop and an assassin. By dint of making them both female, there's a certain sort of radicalness which goes along with that, which is sad in a way, but true, fresh. No. And then her humor, the way she just sort of plays with, I mean, she just has something so special, the way she mixes pathos with something then hilariously rude and shocking, and even at times outrageously cruel, and the humor of humiliation in her work. But underneath it all is this really very deep, truthful engagement with how people are, how humans are, the psychology. And I think I don't know entirely why this show has landed as well as it has. I mean, it's just been phenomenal. It was sort of the most successful show at the BAFTAs a few days ago. It just won a Peabody. Sandra won a Golden Globe. I mean, it's incredible. It's the fastest growing show. We have most growth season after season, more than any other show in cable for 3 years. It's just incredible.
Yeah. The writing is so good. The performances and direction are brilliant.
Amazing.
But the writing is so good. As a writer, I think, my God, this is really, oh, wow, yeah.
And I think it starts there. It's really, TV is such a writer's medium, I think. And I think it does, conversation around representation and gender. I think that we've never quite seen these women before, and I think the ability for women to be not just strong, not just amazing, but also really flawed, and the truth with which Phoebe explores desire and obsession and a pull towards one's dark side, in Eve, as well as obviously in Villanelle, the psychopath, I think feels so fresh because we just haven't seen enough stories that are concerned with that. And then it's done in her signature style, which is amazing.
Yes. Well, the old joke. It used to be the sex pot, and then it was the DA. Those were the parts were the parts for women. And of course we're more than half the human species, and there's quite a variation among us, which we haven't seen given back to us. And it's deeply refreshing. I have to say that I realize, when I look at the shows that have taken place under your aegis, whether it's The Honorable Woman, that was, I guess, at Sundance TV, or Orphan Black at, BBC America, that I have been a fan of the Sarah Barnett network, across the networks that you have run, and so I'm a viewer of the Sarah. But wherever you go, there is a trail of not only success but of excellence, Sarah, and and of a totally new representation of the real world in which female human beings live, and I'm so grateful for that, and for everything that you do with the Women's Media Center, but also that you do for the general public and for the arts on television. It's a superb gift. So thank you. Thank you. And
thank you, Robin.
Thank you for being with us today, and keep up the brilliant work.
Such a pleasure. Really appreciate it. Thanks so much. You too.
Time for our last break today, after which I will, never fear, return with some fighting words.
For the smartest talk about news, politics, sex, books, religion, race, and more, it's Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan. Audacious, witty, provocative, informative, and fun. It's Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan. Talk radio with a brain.
Welcome back to some fighting words. Today, I'm introducing a new Now and Then feature, Reclaimed Anniversaries. Some to celebrate, some to grieve over, some to anger us, all of them to educate ourselves about moments in history we've been robbed of, that are rightfully ours as citizens of this planet and this republic. Historical facts that would surprise and empower us if we only knew about them. There might not be a calendar example of this every week, or there might be so many that this might grow into a regular weekly feature, but for now it can share space with fighting words because that's fitting. In a few days, on June 15th, we should note with bitter sadness the anniversary of a religious wound to our secular nation, a violation of the Pledge of Allegiance. So-called traditionalists are rabid to keep inserting under God in the Pledge of Allegiance, but they actually are anti-tradition. Those two words never appeared in the original pledge, penned in 1892 by Francis Bellamy, a Baptist minister forced to resign the pulpit for having called himself a Christian socialist. After lengthy, intense lobbying by the Knights of Columbus and the American Legion, the words "one nation indivisible" were changed by Congress to "one nation under God indivisible." This was as late as June 15, 1954, reflecting Joe McCarthy's bombast against godless communism at the height of the Cold War. Francis Bellamy's granddaughter, Barbara Bellamy Wright, has denounced the insertion, claiming that her grandfather, quote, would have objected strongly to this change, as it changed the fundamental meaning. He had considered that "one nation indivisible" conveyed the deep meaning that after the Civil War, our nation could not be divided. Close quote. That had been the tradition. On Flag Day, back in 1943, the U.S. Supreme Court, in West Virginia State Board of Education versus Barnett, ruled unconstitutional a law compelling school children to recite the pledge and salute the flag. Writing for the court, the great Justice Robert H. Jackson declared, quote, "If there is any fixed star in our constitutional constellation, it is that no official, high or petty, can prescribe what shall be orthodox in politics, nationalism, religion, or other matters of opinion." Close quote. The original Pledge of Allegiance goes, "I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all." Similarly, the motto on U.S. coins, the major exchange medium in the 18th century when this country was founded, was simply the word liberty. "In God We Trust" began to appear informally on some U.S. coins during the 19th century due to a spread of religious intensity following the agonies of the Civil War. But when, early in the 20th century, President Theodore Roosevelt commissioned the design for new coinage, he made a point of leaving the words off, expressing his, quote, "very firm conviction that to put such a motto, 'In God We Trust,' on coins not only does no good, but does positive harm," close quote. But Congress overrode him, formally legislating the 4 words 4 coins in 1908. This after a lengthy crusade initiated by a hyper-religious director of the Mint, James Pollock. A well-organized outcry, including petitions from religious congregations, frightened Rough Rider Roosevelt so much that he conceded, announcing he would not veto the bill after all. Despite having slowly become the principal medium of exchange during the following decades, paper currency escaped being godded up until 1957, McCarthyism again. Religious advocates began agitating for the words on paper currency during the 1940s in the wake of World War II, but not until the more welcoming political climate of the 1950s did they succeed. The 1950s also saw In God We Trust's adoption as the national so-called motto, now ensconced on a wall in the U.S. House of Representatives. The founders would be outraged. Their original motto and Great Seal, devised by John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, and Thomas Jefferson, was E pluribus unum, Latin for from many, one, which, with liberty, was considered sufficient and appropriate until the charge of the God Brigades. Notice that unity was the core word, and unity is what's being attacked and fragmented today. Those are my fighting words. Add yours on Twitter and remember to tag us at WMC Live and use the hashtag Fighting Words. And that's our show for today. You can follow me on Twitter at @TheRobinMorgan and on Facebook at facebook.com/TheRobinMorgan. Check out my blog at robinmorgan.net and find my latest book, Dark Matter, wherever books are sold. Opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily represent the Women's Media Center. Here's the family for our show. Executive producer as well as founding and sustaining sponsor, Regina K. Scully. WMC president and co-executive producer of this program, Julie Burton. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Join us again next time on Women's Media Center Live.